Constructor overloading. We have already seen what are constructors. Constructors are special types of functions in a class or special type of member functions that have the same name as the class name, and they are used only for initialization purpose. So, these types of functions can also be overloaded in C++. We will see an example for that. Here again you are having a class, the name of the class is CAL, it is a short form for calculate. Here you are having private members, data members of integer type, 3 variables you are having, n1, n2 and TOT. TOT is a short form for total. So, from this itself you can identify that you are trying to calculate the sum of 2 integer numbers. Then you are having the public part of the class. Here if you see, there are 2 constructors. One constructor is cal with no arguments, the other constructor is also cal with 2 integer arguments. Then you are having get member function with 2 integer arguments again. You are having an add function and you are having a display function. So, the first n1, n2 and tot are called the data members. You have the class ending after disp with the flower brace ending with a semicolon. Get, add and disp are called member functions. Cal, because it is having the same name as the class, they are called constructors. So, this is the organization of the class. You are having the data members, you are having 2 constructors with a class name and you are having 3 member functions. So, now we have to give the definition. Here we have only declared what the class holds. Now, we have to identify or define what each function and what each constructor is going to do. So, here you have the first constructor function. Using the class name, the scope resolution operator, they are defining this constructor with no arguments. You are initializing the data members to 0. We all know constructor does only this work. And then you are closing the first constructor function. Then you have the next constructor function which is having 2 integer arguments. Here what you are doing is whatever arguments are coming out in this constructor function, that you are assigning it to the data members. So, it is not necessary that in a function you need to initialize the values only to 0. A constructor with no arguments initializes the data members to 0, but when you want the user to define his or her own values and initialize the data members, you go in for this concept of constructors with parameters. This also we have seen in the previous session. So, here these values will be given by the user and these values will be given as the initial values to the data members of the class. But we should always remember that when we are using a constructor, every data member of the class should be initialized. Here if you see, you are having only 2 arguments, you are initializing that to n1 and n2, but this third data member tot has no value over here. So, you are simply initializing it to 0. So, these are the definition of the constructors, definition of the member functions. We have 3 member functions here: get, summing up and displaying of the result. So, here we are having the constructor overloading which we have seen. Now, we are going to see the definition of the member function get. So, in get again you are having 2 arguments, again you are initializing the 2 arguments and giving them as a result to n1 and n2. Now, you can very well see the difference between these 2 functions. Here also you are having initialization, here also you are having initialization. But here if you see, this third member tot is also initialized, here that is not there. This is because the work of the get function is not initialization. You can do anything in a get function. You can get the value from the user, or you can simply initialize the values to 0 or to any other argument. Whereas in a constructor, initialization is the only function. That is the reason we have to initialize all the data members of a class in a constructor function. Whereas in a user defined function, whatever values we need according to the program's purpose, we can initialize the values. So, in this get function, because it is a user defined member function, we are initializing only the integer values which are required at the moment, and the get function is closed. Next, we have to define the add function. Add, we all know it is to sum up. So, n1 and n2 are added, the values given to TOT, and then display is to display the result. So, see out the sum is TOT. So, with this all the definitions of the functions are also over. So, the class has been fully created and it is now complete. Now, the program execution will begin from the main function. So, here we have the definition of the main function. Inside the main function, to access the data members and member functions, we need the object. So, first we have to create the objects for the class. Now first, when you are creating the object cal C1, so C1 is the first object. As soon as the object is created, we know that the constructor function is called. So now there are two constructors in this program. Which constructor function will be called? Now the compiler will next see the parameters of the constructor. One constructor is not having any arguments, the other constructor is having two arguments. So when the first object is created, when the C1 is created, the compiler identifies that it is not carrying any constructor or it is not carrying any arguments. So immediately the compiler will move to the constructor functions with no argument. So it will initialize the values of n1, n2 and tot to 0. When the next object is created C2, 10 and 20, immediately the compiler will move to this constructor. It is having two arguments 10 and 20. So it will assign the value of 10 to D1, 20 to D2, 10 will be assigned to N1, 20 will be assigned to N2 and tot will be initialized to 0. So these are the two things done by the compiler when it sees the first two objects being created. The next, the compiler creates a pointer variable. We will see how this is used. Cal is a class name, pointer pt. Now here if you see, pt is equal to new cal of 23, 13. Now this 23, 13 comes again with the constructor cal. That means you have to call the constructor which is having two arguments. But how is this pointer variable going to call that function or call that constructor? For that reason, we have here a new definition called new operator. We will see the definition of this new operator before we proceed to the calling of the cal function. Now after that, we are having c2.add and c2.disp, which is nothing but using the object you are calling the two functions. Then you are having pt member access operator, that is this arrow mark operator, add and disp, and then you are having this delete pt. So why is this new operator used and why is this delete operator used? Only with the pointer variable. So they have a special purpose in C++.